Alright, so let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. So as you guys know, the autonomic nervous system is the motor branch of the nervous system that innervates smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and also glandular tissue. And there's two different divisions here. There's a sympathetic division and a parasympathetic division, and these are activated under very different responses. Okay, they innervate the same organs, but they do different things to these organs, and control over this is involuntary. So if the sympathetic response is activated, that's called the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic response is called the rest and digest response. And for this first part of the autonomic nervous system, this panopto, we're going to talk about the sympathetic division, the fight or flight response. Alright, so these are all the effector organs right here for the autonomic nervous system, or most of them I should say. And the autonomic nervous system consists of two divisions. Like I said, there's a sympathetic division and there's a parasympathetic division. And what I want to point out here is that the nerves for both of these divisions are pretty much innervating the same organs. So they're both innervating the smooth muscle in the eye, the tear glands, the lungs, the heart, all the digestive viscera, all that type of thing, the genitals as well. But they have different actions. They generally have opposing actions because they're innervated at different times. So let's look at the sympathetic nervous system here. And the sympathetic motor neurons are going to originate in the spinal cord in the thoracic region and in the lumbar region. So let me say that again. The motor neurons for the sympathetic nervous system are going to originate in the spinal cord between spinal cord segments T1 and L2. So this is called the thoracolumbar division. And what these motor neurons are going to do is they're going to travel through spinal nerves to get to their destination. So these motor neurons travel through spinal nerves to get to their destination. The parasympathetic motor neurons, this is the parasympathetic division over here. These motor neurons originate from the brain and the sacral region of the spinal cord. So these motor neurons for the sacral region, these are traveling through spinal nerves. But what about these motor neurons that are originating from the head, from the cranial region? Well, these motor neurons are traveling through cranial nerves. And in fact, cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 all carry parasympathetic motor neurons to get to these effector organs that they want to innervate. And I want to point out, here's cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, and you can see that going to all of these visceral organs right here. Okay, so I have some anatomy here for you guys, and the nursing school, really stresses, they want you guys to know this anatomy and the structure of the nervous system, in particular with the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so most pre- and post-ganglionic neurons in the sympathetic nervous system synapse in structures called sympathetic chains. Oh, I guess I skipped something here. Okay, yeah. In either of these cases, in the sympathetic or the parasympathetic division, it takes two motor neurons to get from the central nervous system to the effector organ. So let's look at the sympathetic system. Here's one neuron right there. It synapses with another neuron that goes to the effector organ. Okay, so there's two neurons to get from, in the sympathetic case, from the spinal cord to the effector organ. Now these neurons are going to synapse in structures called ganglia. And this is the sympathetic chain ganglia right there, where most of these neurons are going to synapse at. So the neurons before the ganglia are called the preganglionic neurons. These are preganglionic neurons. There's the ganglia. They synapse, and these are the postganglionic neurons right there that take it to the effector organs. Okay, so for the sympathetic system, most pre- and postganglionic neurons synapse in structures called sympathetic chains, and these chains run on each side of the vertebral column. This is a sympathetic chain right here, and there's one on the other side. And this is on your lab ID list, and it's on the torso model. On the posterior side, you can see these sympathetic chains running down each side of the vertebral column. So what happens is you have the preganglionic neuron that comes out of the spinal cord, and it comes around and it synapses with the postganglionic neuron in this sympathetic chain right there. Then it synapses with the postganglionic neuron, and that neuron takes it to the specific effector organs. And this is a nice picture of those sympathetic chains. There's a sympathetic chain right there. There's a sympathetic chain right there. Okay, so the sympathetic system is activated during times of activity, especially during periods of exercise, excitement, or threatening situations. And so these situations activate what's called the fight or flight response. They activate the sympathetic system, and by doing so, activate the fight or flight response. And what the fight or flight response is going to do, what the sympathetic system is going to do, it's going to activate the necessary effector organs required to maintain homeostasis over the internal parameters that are being tested by the situation. Okay, that's a lot of words, but let's look at it here. So here we have a situation. This is an exercise situation that's going to stimulate the fight or flight response. And the fight or flight response, the job of it, partially, is to maintain homeostasis over internal body parameters that are being tested by this situation. So what internal parameters are being tested by this situation? Well, we have body temperature. Okay, body temperature goes up. Blood sugar levels. What's happening to blood sugar levels? Well, they're dropping. So temperature up, levels low. What about acid base or pH balance? That's being tested as well. And specifically, when you're exercising, your body tends to drift toward the acidic side, and we want to get that back. So all of these things here are going to be corrected by the sympathetic nervous system. So why is blood sugar going down when you exercise? Well, it's because of the increased energy demands of the skeletal muscles. Other organs as well, but primarily the skeletal muscles. Okay, they're increasing cellular respiration so they can generate more ATP. And so because of these increased energy demands, we're requiring more glucose, and so our blood sugar levels go down. Another thing that happens when you increase your respiration, you increase cellular respiration, is you also increase the amount of heat that you're generating. Okay, so that's something else that we have to deal with. We have to deal with low blood sugar. We have to deal with increased heat. And we also have to deal with the body becoming too acidic. And that occurs because we accumulate too much CO2. So all three of these things we have to deal with here. So what does the sympathetic system do about it? This is the sympathetic system, and these are the effector organs that they activate right here. Well, guess what? We're going to have the sympathetic system that synapses, that innervates the liver. And what do you think it's going to tell the liver to do? It's not going to tell it to do this. What it's going to tell it to do is take some of that glycogen. I guess we haven't talked about this in this class. This is 242 that we did. But anyways, the liver stores glucose. It stores sugar as a molecule called glycogen. Okay, so the sympathetic system is going to stimulate the liver and cause that glycogen to be released as glucose into the blood, and that increases your blood sugar. So it's stimulating the liver to do that. Body temperature. How's the sympathetic system going to deal with that? Well, it activates sweat glands. Okay, so you release sweat and temperature gets released along with it. What else does the sympathetic system do? It vasodilates the blood vessels that are close to the skin. So instead of having a blood vessel that's that size, the sympathetic system goes, whoop, we're going to increase the size of the blood vessels near the skin. That allows more blood to travel to the skin and allows more heat to escape across the skin. So that's how we're dealing with body temperature. Some other things that we want to do. We want to increase blood flow to the skeletal muscle so we can get more glucose, oxygen, all that kind of stuff there and pick up more CO2. And the sympathetic nervous system does that as well. It can vasodilate the blood vessels that go to the skeletal muscle. And in fact, it vasodilates blood vessels that go to the skeletal muscle and also the heart because those places need more blood. But at the same time, it's going to restrict blood flow. It's going to vasoconstrict blood vessels that go to the abdomen and also most vessels of the body because now the abdomen's not a priority in this exercise situation. And that's how it can do that. You have this sympathetic innervation of the smooth muscle of the blood vessels, and when the sympathetic system is firing real quick, it causes them to vasoconstrict, and when it lets up on that firing, it causes them to vasodilate. Here's the sympathetic innervation of the heart, and we don't need to get in this too much, but basically the medulla, well, here we go. So here's the medulla oblongata, and the medulla oblongata has cardioinhibitory and cardioacceleratory centers in it. So the medulla oblongata can choose to increase heart rate or decrease heart rate depending on the situation. And if we want to increase heart rate, it activates these sympathetic neurons. Here's the preganglionic, Here's the preganglionic neuron, and it goes to the postganglionic neuron, which goes to the heart and causes it to increase heart rate. There's also the parasympathetic system here. So here's the parasympathetic system that can come down and cause heart rate to decrease. Acid-base balance, what are we going to do about that? So the body becomes acidic during exercise. And this is the sympathetic nervous system innervation of the respiratory system. This is the respiratory tract, that's the trachea. These are the branches in the lungs. And what it does is it causes the branches in the lungs, what are called the bronchioles, to dilate, to get wider. The sympathetic nervous system does that. And what that does is it allows more airflow into and out of the lungs, so it allows more gas exchange, and specifically it allows more CO2 to leave the lungs, which causes which gets our acid-base balance back to where it needs to be. These are other sympathetic situations. Nervousness, public speaking can activate the sympathetic situation. This is probably the most traditional sympathetic situation, the fight or flight. These guys are choosing wisely and taking the flight option instead of the fight option. Okay. Excitement, anything that gets excitement, anxiety, all those things are sympathetic situations. And what these are all the effector organs on the next couple pages here. These are all the effector organs of the autonomic nervous system, and this shows what the parasympathetic system does to it and what the sympathetic system does to it. So these are really good references, and they're actually kind of fun to read, believe it or not. Okay, so now let's talk about the neurotransmitters that we find in the sympathetic nervous system. And this is a schematic of that. This is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the preganglionic neuron. Here it synapses in the sympathetic chain, and then this is the postganglionic neuron right here. And the postganglionic neuron is going to synapse or release neurotransmitters onto the effector organ. So in the sympathetic system, both preganglionic neurons and postganglionic neurons release the neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. So here's a preganglionic neuron releasing acetylcholine onto the postganglionic neuron. So I forget what I said about the postganglionic neuron, but in the sympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine is released only by the preganglionic neurons, not by the post. So I don't know if I said that wrong, but in the sympathetic system, all preganglionic neurons release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine onto the postganglionic neurons there. And a term that they want you to know is cholinergic. And cholinergic fibers refer to neurons that release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So here we have acetylcholine being released onto these postganglionic neurons there. Now, most sympathetic postganglionic neurons release the neurotransmitter norepinephrine onto the effector organs. And norepinephrine is also known as noradrenaline here. So back to our schematic, we have this postganglionic neuron that releases norepinephrine, noradrenaline, onto the effector organ. So here we have preganglionic neuron releasing acetylcholine. Then the postganglionic neuron releases norepinephrine, in this case onto a blood vessel. Here's a long preganglionic. Oh, sorry, that's parasympathetic. So yeah, this is the postganglionic for the sympathetic. Those are releasing norepinephrine onto their effector organs, and that's what this is showing right here. Here's your postganglionic neuron, and here's your effector cell, and we're releasing the neurotransmitter norepinephrine across that synaptic cleft. Now, these norepinephrine releasing fibers are called adrenergic fibers. So these are adrenergic fibers. And there's a whole lot of different receptors for these adrenergic fibers for norepinephrine to bind onto. And we're not going to get into this, but this is a prime place where pharmacology can come along and design drugs that bind to these specific receptors that are located on different organs and therefore only selectively stimulate organs of the sympathetic system. And then the last thing I want to say is that the sympathetic system of the adrenal gland is somewhat modified. So this is the adrenal gland there that sits on top of the kidney, and the sympathetic nervous system comes in and it innervates the adrenal gland. And this is a little bit different. So here are preganglionic neurons. Here's a preganglionic neuron. It comes in, it completely bypasses the sympathetic chain, and that preganglionic neuron makes its way all the way down to the adrenal gland. And when it's in the adrenal gland, it causes it specifically acts on the adrenal medulla, this area in here, and it causes cells within the adrenal gland to release both epinephrine and norepinephrine into the blood. Okay, so the sympathetic system, let's do this again, sympathetic system, the preganglionic neuron stimulates cells in the adrenal gland which cause the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine into the blood. And so now what happens is these hormones are traveling through the blood and they're having the same effect as norepinephrine released by postganglionic neurons. So it's another way for the sympathetic system to have its effect. These are more widespread effects here. Okay, that's good for